We are officially less than a month away from the NBA trade deadline. Can you believe it? We're already here, early January, and now all eyes turn to Kings general manager Monte McNair. He's done a phenomenal job already this offseason and this season, in my opinion, more than deserving of a contract extension. But how should he approach this trade deadline? With a lot of aggression, some aggression? Should he be confident staying put? Joining me to discuss this and maybe some targets the Kings should consider going after, Jay MarZZ from Sactown Sports 1140 is right here with me on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season long. Today, presented by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10 News. Before I was at ABC 10, I was at Sactown Sports 1140 Radio, then known as Sports 1140 KHDK, and I worked many, many years with my friend Jay MarZZ. Jay is an incredible producer. He is a great basketball mind. And of course, a dedicated follower of the Sacramento Kings. Has been on Locked On Kings many, many times, and I'm excited to have him back on for us to discuss this upcoming trade deadline. There are a lot of ways that Monty can approach it. Differences of opinion on which is the right way and which isn't. Do you go aggressive, try and make a major splash? Do you just try and make a couple minor moves? Do you stand put and don't give up any assets and just hope that you can hold this fifth seed spot that the Kings are currently in? Jay and I are going to discuss a boatload of scenarios, and we want to hear what you think the Kings should do at the trade deadline and any targets that you think the Kings should go after. Big names, small names, does not matter. Let's discuss it. At Matt George Sack on Twitter. You can tweet me publicly or DM me privately there. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, let's start those conversations and maybe theoretical trades in the comment section down below. But for right now, please enjoy this trade deadline conversation with Jay MarZZ from Sactown Sports 1140. Pleasure to be joined once again by my friend Jay MarZZ, former colleague of mine at Jay MarZZ, still a Sactown Sports 1140, producer extraordinaire, of course, does excellent work on the air as well. Jay and I worked together many times at Sactown Sports 1140, so it's always fun to have him back here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Jay, hope you are well, my friend. Hope you are actually enjoying producing and covering a team that's relevant, if nothing else, this year with the Sacramento Kings, of course, being the flagship over there at Sactown Sports 1140. How have you enjoyed this season? How has this season been different for you compared to years past?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me back. I was, when you hit me yesterday, I'm like, you know what? This is the first time me and you are going to have a conversation, whether it's through video, podcast, on air, in person, where the Sacramento Kings are a relevant basketball team in the NBA. So kind of to lead with that, it's been a lot more fun. I'll tell you that. And I'm sure you can attest to this both on the air, on the pod, man. When you're covering a team that shows life, especially with the fan base rallying around it this year, that 2018-2019 season, they started to show those signs, right? We're like, oh, this might be a playoff time. But this team is completely different in the feeling around the fan base. It feels like, you see this in, when you have like YouTube chats, you have open streams and stuff, 80% of the commentary is just so negative and, hard to be positive about a team that had been in the playoffs for 16 straight years. But you can see the turn in the fan base. It's just so much more fun to cover a team again that is playing well, sitting number one in the Pacific. Who would have had that, to start 2023 and in a top 5 spot right now in the very crowded Western Conference.
And speaking of crowded Western Conference, like we're going to spend a lot of time today discussing this Kings roster and adjustments to the roster. We are less than a month away from the trade deadline already. Hard to believe. Like we're at that point in the season. And this is where Monte McNair's work really needs to begin, but also maybe where a little bit of soul searching needs to happen for Monte. He's been consistent throughout his entire time as a general manager with he's always going to keep an eye on ways to improve the team and he's going to stay flexible and yada, yada, yada. But this is the first time he's going into a trade deadline with a team that is in the playoff picture and needs to hold that spot. And Jay, once we get into March, once we get into April, those are the months where we really start to see the jockeying for position. Those are the months where you really start to see the teams that have been there before create a little bit of separation. And of course, this is unfamiliar territory for the Sacramento Kings. So as of right now, and of course, context can change with a trade deadline every day and players can suddenly become available. But as of right now, how aggressive would you be approaching this trade deadline if you were Monty?
Super aggressive. I mean, you're looking at this right now. You kind of got to catch lightning in a bottle. Like we said, we know where they're at in the standings. They're 3 games above 500, where they're at the Pacific Division. This team, given the momentum that they've had early in the season, I mean, it's crazy. After that second Rockets game on Friday, we'll be halfway through the year. I mean, it's flown by. He has to be super aggressive at the trade deadline. And that doesn't mean go out and find a third superstar because, A, I just don't think that'll be available, number one. Number two, don't think they have the assets. But this team obviously has some holes in their game, and those holes need to be clogged. I know there's all the talk on message boards and social media about, hey, go out and sign this big or go out and sign this guy. Personally, I look at the market right now, Matt, when it comes to who is available in free agency. And of course, that could change in the buyout market. And that's another conversation we'll have to have at some point. Is the buyout market this year, the Kings will actually be someone looking to possibly acquire somebody. But it is bare out there right now. They've signed PJ Dozier to this 10-day deal. You've heard, hey, they should sign DeMarcus Cousins. I just don't think at this point that is something. And put it this way, I think if DeMarcus were an actual option, they would have done it, given that Mike Brown is the head coach and he spent time with DeMarcus in Golden State. If they were really like, no, DeMarcus is the missing piece off the bench, he would have already been signed. I mean, he's put it out there on his own social media. He'd love to come back to Sacramento. It's not happening. So, again, I would question whether anybody on the free agent market is going to make it a splash. So, it's going to be a very interesting trade deadline because you're looking at 12 teams in the West who think they have a legit shot at either the playoffs or the play-in team. So you're not going to have a lot of sellers out West. But then you look at the East. I mean, there's so much going on out there. What is Atlanta going to do? They have guys that are on the market. Chicago possibly, they could be going off and trying to sell off some pieces. Toronto has apparently made it known that Scotty Barnes is the only non-touchable on their team. You have the Wizards. So I think it's going to be a really interesting trade market that Monty has to be really aggressive in, but there's going to be a lot of teams out West that are going to be really aggressive, and it's going to be interesting to see what's going to be out there and what the Kings have that's going to be able to entice somebody.
Currently in the West, the Kings are sitting in the 5th seed. They've been around that 4, 5, 6 for really the last month of the season or so, fluctuating between the 3 spots. They're a game back of 4th. They're 3 games back of 3rd, which is currently held by the Pelicans. Now they're only a game and a half ahead of 6 and 7, and 2 games ahead of 8, which are the Warriors, Clippers, and Suns. 3 established teams who are going to be gunning for you. So when you're looking at the standings, you talk about being aggressive, but there's different levels of being aggressive. There's aggressively trying to get the pieces that you need to kind of hold where you're at, to just hold and try and maintain that 5th seed. There's aggressive trying to close the gap and secure 4 or even 3, which means you're getting home court advantage in that opening playoff series. And then there's like just kind of staying put and believing that 6, 7, and 8, if you were to drop a couple spots, that's not the end of the world. What's your level of aggression there? Are you going for 3 or 4? Or are you just trying to maintain and hold at 5?
I mean, if you maintain and hold at 5, I mean, that is a home run season. Monty McNair will have a statue built for him outside the Golden One Center.
Agreed.
So that's where I'm looking at if I'm the Kings. As much as 3 or 4 can be enticing, and, we don't know how that's going to play out, especially injury-wise. Obviously, Zion with the Pelicans and being out for some extended time, you could possibly see them drop. I don't see the Nuggets or Grizzlies really dropping. I think they've definitely established themselves in the West. But the Mavericks are one Luka Doncic injury away from being irrelevant. I truly mean that. I mean, he has carried that team to the 4 seed right now. The Warriors, you got to expect, and they've shown a lot of signs playing better. Steph Curry is going to be coming back tonight. And then you look at the other teams at 7 and 8 right now, the Clippers and Suns, both losers of 6 straight. The Clippers is just, injuries are obviously going to always be a thing with them. The Suns are just a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's more to what happened with that team this summer than that's really out there. So if I'm the Kings and I can stay around 5 or 6, that's what I'm looking to do. And to me, what does that mean? it means improving some of those spots off the bench, especially when it comes to either a playmaker or a big. And that's where, you got to start looking at the market. I think that's where Monty McNair should be targeting. A, because it's not going to probably cost him too much to upgrade those spots. And B, those are really the two biggest holes right now on this team.
Yeah, talking about cost, I think that's really important because before you can even establish what you want to go out and get and how much value you're going for, you have to establish what value you're willing to give up. You can't just acquire something for nothing. So, I mean, a lot of teams in the Sacramento Kings position, when they're buyers going after sellers, typically it's draft compensation and expiring contracts that you see. Well, the Kings draft situation is a little mucky, a little locked up because of the Kevin Huerter trade, which was a phenomenal trade by all extent of the imagination by Monty McNair. But asset-wise, in addition to, I mean, there's ways that he could restructure the protections on that pick so that it frees up the picks, or he could just go deep into his pick bank and throw as many picks out there as he needs to. But then there's an expiring contract like a Harrison Barnes, who I think would be a mistake to get rid of. There's young players like a Keegan Murray or Davion Mitchell. If you're really trying to make a major splash, if you're looking at this Kings roster of assets you feel comfortable making available in conversation, what are those assets?
Well, I mean, you look at the bench, you already named some of those pieces right there. We've already seen Monty McNair has no problem trading guys he drafted in the first round. We found that out last year. I look at this situation as I don't see a scenario where a guy like Fox is traded or Sabonis is traded.
Not at all.
I don't see a scenario where Huerter's traded. Barnes, maybe, but they're going to have to get something back, I think, for Harrison that they feel is going to put them over the top, because right now, to your point, I think Harrison, especially you watch these last few games, he's been really good on the floor, but he's such an integral part of that team in the locker room and keeping those guys together. I don't see a scenario where Keegan Murray is traded, but again, if something pops up, don't be shocked if that's a thing. I think more along the line, someone like Davion Mitchell. Again, if you're getting the right piece, and what does that right piece look like? Let's say the Wizards make Kyle Kuzma available, right? And, the big thing they'll want from the Kings there is Davion Mitchell. I think Monty McNair would make that deal. I don't even think he would hesitate at that point if Keegan Murray was asked to make that deal. I think he would hesitate, but depending on everything, it's not a slam dunk. So a guy like Davion Mitchell will definitely be something, especially because going back to it, this team needs another playmaker off the bench. I mean, when Fox and Sabonis are not on the floor, that offense just comes to a screeching halt. Unfortunately, I think people are expecting Malik Monk and Malik can pass the ball, but I wouldn't call him a playmaker first and foremost. He's a scorer. He's a spark plug off that bench. So guys like that, I think, will be available. Monty McNair does have some second-round picks at his disposal. As you pointed out, the first-round picks are a little mucky. So a guy I was thinking of, especially if Chicago decides that, we got all this money invested into a team that's just not going to go very far, and they're going to look to sell off some pieces. I think a guy like Andre Drummond would be very good off the bench for the Sacramento Kings. Mm-hmm. He can block shots, he'll rebound, which are two things they need off the bench. And when he was in Detroit, they like to run the ball through him in the high post, which is what the Kings like to do with Sabonis. So you could potentially be bringing a big off the bench that can obviously not replicate what Sabonis does, but he can spot you 15 minutes a game and you can have a semblance of that offense. And that's a guy I just don't think would cost you very much. To your point, some expiring contracts, maybe a couple second-round picks. I think that would be a steal for the Kings at the deadline. And I think a move like that would, really help this team solidify on the bench and kind of stay in that 5, 6, 7 range of the playoffs.
I think I disagree with you slightly on the Kyle Kuzma thing because if you're going to trade Davion Mitchell, and I think Davion Mitchell has been, to be quite blunt, I think he's been disappointing this season on the offensive end of the floor. Defensively, sure, we know how good he is. And the Kings are so bad defensively that they're so reliant upon him that I think Monty would be hesitant to give up that defense for another scoring option like Kuzma. I don't think he would consider giving up Keegan Murray in a Kuzma deal. That's just me. And you know how high I am on Keegan Murray. So maybe that's my own interpretation of the situation. To me, you're only moving Keegan Murray if it's a major splash deal. But I think, Jay, the major splash deal's already been done. It was the Tyrese Halliburton for Domantas Sabonis.
Oh, yeah.
Like the big splash has already been done. Now You just need to sprinkle a little bit of seasoning on this. And that's where you're talking about bolstering that bench. That's where, like, Andre Drummond, I think, is an interesting option. I think some people, or who are listening to this or watching this, probably heard you or saw you bring that name up and probably instantly rolled their eyes because they're thinking of Andre Drummond as the starting center for the Detroit Pistons. It's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone who can play 8 to 10 to max 12 minutes to give Domantas Sabonis a little bit of a breather, who can essentially do the little things that the Kings need to do while Sabonis is getting some rest. And those are the players that are out there that I think Monty is going to be keeping his eye on. I don't think this is going to be a super exciting trade deadline for the Sacramento Kings. Maybe like years past, we thought maybe the Kings would make some big moves, and of course what they did last year. But I think this is going to be a extremely tactical trade deadline for Monty McNair, where we're going to be able to really dissect anything that he is involved in.
Right. And again, I'm with you. I don't think this is going to be super splashy just because, I don't think there's going to be a ton of splashy guys out there. And given the Kings, handicap when it comes to their first round picks, if a guy comes available, let's throw it out there, Pascal Siakam, right? Toronto looking to get off of him. I don't think the Kings have the assets personally that the Raptors are going to want to have. And I think there's other teams that are just better equipped to go out and get a guy like that right now. So you got to look at that. And then, I saw something today where Atlanta wants like a Rudy Gobert-esque package for John Collins, which I think is laughable, by the way.
Have fun.
Good luck even getting half of that for John Collins at this point. But that's another guy. Like, what are you willing to give up for John Collins? It's just, those are the guys that would be, quote unquote, I think, splashy in a deadline like this. And again, I just don't think they make a lot of sense for Sacramento right now. So you want to start looking at, okay, who are guys off of benches? Again, I mentioned Drummond as an example. Those are going to be the guys you should get used to being rumored for the Sacramento Kings.
This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the #1 way to play daily fantasy sports. It's my favorite way of now playing daily fantasy sports instead of dealing with the hassle of setting lineups and going through drafts and taking on different opponents and dealing with their players, especially in fantasy NBA, playing more games per week than your best players are. You don't have to worry about that. The way Prize Picks works, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will go and score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. It's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available, and they offer projections for so many different sports, all the sports that you watch, including the NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, men's and women's college basketball, WNBA, soccer, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, Euro basketball, cricket. Yeah, even those sports and more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They offer safe and fast withdrawals. So when you make money, when you win, you will actually get that money in a quick and orderly fashion. It's currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada. If you want to give it a try, if you're signing up for the first time, check this out. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. So what you do, you enter the promo code, you deposit $100, you instantly get $100, no questions asked. You deposit $50, you instantly get $50. Basically, they match your money up to $100 on your first deposit. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. A name you didn't bring up that would definitely be a splash that I am, even though I'm a really big fan of this player, and for years I was trying to get this player in Sacramento, I don't think it makes sense or it's necessarily the right splash for the Kings to make is Lauri Markkanen.
Oh, and God. If you can get Lauri Markkanen, listen.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, like, a lot of people think perfect fit, right? Starting 4, stretches the floor. He's been an incredible scoring option, is having a massive season for the Utah Jazz, is playing excellent basketball. To me, making that big of a splash for another scorer who doesn't really play much defense, you're giving up a lot of assets in order to make this happen. If Markkanen comes in, you go from a team that's capable of scoring 120 a night to 128? I don't think that helps the Kings that much. I mean, the Kings are already trying to outscore their opponents on a nightly basis as it is. If there's a big splash out there, and I don't think it exists to what the conversation that we've been having, it's a guy that is going to come in that can provide offense, who is going to be a stopper and a game changer on the defensive end of the floor. Lauri Markkanen isn't that.
No, what Lauri Markkanen though, he is a perfect fit on offense as a stretch four with Sabonis,
Right.
definitely. But right now, you got to look at what the Kings have at forward. Is you would want Markkanen out there on the wing stretching. Keegan Murray's hitting over 40% of his threes right now. I mean, he's providing that stretch for you. Same with Harrison Barnes. And as much as I'd love a guy like Markkanen, I think Danny Ainge, if he's in the market to trade Lauri Markkanen right now, what did we see with both Gobert and Mitchell? He's going to want a haul of first-round draft picks for him, and I think fairly would get that. The Kings, given that the protections they put on that Herter pick, I just don't think they have the first-round pick to even make that happen. So while I agree with you, I mean, Markkanen just adds another, star offensive player. It would, I think it would make the team overall better when you just look at the massive situation. I just don't think there's a way you can trade for a guy like that, unfortunately, because of the first round draft capital you'd have to give up that the Kings just don't really have right now.
And that's the different levels of aggression that we're talking about, right? It's being aggressive for attainable assets that aren't going to handicap you in the future going forward. Although if there is a piece that becomes available that we're not even talking about, that we're not even considering could be available, and that happens every year, if that is the right guy, maybe, I mean, I don't look at this as like necessarily on the star tier, but I know like OG Anunoby is such a loved prospect or idea for the Sacramento Kings to go and get from Toronto, who might be sellers. Well, OG definitely comes in and I think helps your defense, but he's not going to save you as this star of the future. So what assets are you willing to give up and that kind of deal? I just think it's going to be really interesting. There are so many different tiers of value that the Kings are going to have to examine as to what they're trying to go out and get and realistically consider, like, okay, you bring in an OG Anunoby. Yes, your defense instantly improves. What does that mean for this year's run? And what does that mean for next year's run? Because ultimately, no matter what you do this year, you're going to want to build upon it next year.
Right. And Toronto's not going to give away Anunoby for free. I mean, he's going to come with a price tag, whether that's picks or young players. You would have to imagine if I'm Toronto and Sacramento's inquiring about any of my guys, Siakam, Anunoby, the first thing I'm looking at is, okay, I want an expiring deal. Well, there's Harrison Barnes right there. That's your expiring money that you would throw in there. And secondly, they're going to want a young player, and they're going to definitely ask about a guy like Keegan Murray. Are you willing to give up your front court for OG Anunoby or expiring Barnes and Davion Mitchell and possibly another late first pick way down there for OG Anunoby? Again, it's one of those situations where the player fits. It's just at what cost does it come? I personally think this year, look, these guys have gotten you 3 games above 500 as you are 2 games away from the midway point. Nobody saw this coming. I think smaller peripheral trades that we've been talking about this season, I think this core group has earned the right to go out there and play and try to get to the playoffs. And just, I think to your point, need to sprinkle a little garnish on that bench. And I really do believe that is the route that Monty McNair will take. Unless some deal comes up where it's just like, oh my God, we cannot pass this up, which again, I just don't see. I don't foresee that happening.
Keeping the core together is an excellent point by you because we have history to point to. Now, I'm not going to pretend, and I've said this before because I think a lot of Kings fans have romanticized what Iman Shumpert was to the Sacramento Kings. Iman Shumpert is not that good of a player to talk about as much as the Sacramento Kings and Kings fans have talked about that Iman Shumpert trade in the past. However, we saw that trade have a drastic effect on the locker room and how the Kings carried themselves. So I ask you, are you concerned at all? Are you considering from Monty's perspective? Monty was not involved in the Iman Shumpert trade. Are you considering, if you're Monty, any impact a move that you make has on the camaraderie, the locker room, the swagger, the beam team-esque kind of mantra that this team has built for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to come from a chemistry standpoint. I think so. And that's where it goes back in a conversation like a guy like Harrison Barnes. Is trading him while you could ultimately possibly upgrade from a position standpoint, is that going to have a negative effect on the locker room? I think a big thing with the Iman Shumpert trade that a lot of people don't talk about is that team was so young. You know, De'Aaron Fox is in his second year at that point. Marvin Bagley is a rookie at that point. Buddy Hield was only a couple years into the league. I think that team was super immature, where I think one of the things with this year's team that we don't talk about enough is there's a lot more maturity on this team. You know, De'Aaron Fox is in season number 6. I think Kevin Huerter's in season 5 or 6. Domantas Sabonis has been, and they got a lot of veteran guys that I don't think it would have as big of an impact as that did, several years ago. But you always have to look at the chemistry in the locker room and understand that if you're bringing in somebody, they have to not just meet with your team on a chemistry expectation, but then they have to improve the team from a statistical standpoint as well. That is a hard thing to find, especially at the trade deadline. And we see these moves made at trade deadlines all the time where we think they're going to have this monumental impact. I'll give you a couple examples. When New Orleans traded for DeMarcus Cousins, right? I think everyone saw like, oh my God, the Twin Towers, Cousin and Davis. Like, dude, Pelicans just punched their way to the playoffs. Pelicans didn't make the playoffs that year when they made that move at the deadline. Same thing when Vucevic was traded to Chicago. He was an all-star at that point in Orlando. Everyone's like, punch the Bulls ticket to the playoffs. Didn't happen, So these moves made at the deadline that are bigger type moves that you think like just from a talent standpoint are going to propel you to the playoffs. There are several examples out there where that just doesn't happen.
This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for online sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football. Maybe you had some fun betting on the college national championship football game, from basketball games, of course, upcoming baseball season. They have esports. They have so much for you on betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those on BetOnline as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website or use your mobile device today to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. And Locked On Kings is brought to you by TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. You can meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes that you file so you do not have to. Not taxes. No taxes. You don't have to do them. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box. That is not taxes. Taste, not taxes. Sing, not taxes, a lullaby. Hope, not taxes, sleeps through the night. You can grab a saddle and ride, not taxes, into the sunset if you want. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring that your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it, without having to lift a finger. Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax. Full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes is required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Publicly, the biggest need talked about for the Sacramento Kings is that backup center spot. And it's clear to see why, watching Sabonis play 40 minutes a night and the drop off when he comes off the floor. However, coming into the season, wing depth was something that we were concerned about, and we've always discussed. Wing depth is always a conversation in Sacramento. If Monty really only has the assets and the ability to really address one issue, I think most people would say backup center. But is there a scenario, is there a chance that addressing your wing depth and fixing that problem at this year's trade deadline and rolling or riding with Rashawn or Chimezie or Nemi or Alex Len for the rest of the season and into the playoffs and 40 minutes of Domantas Sabonis, is there a chance that that's the right play?
Oh, there's absolutely a chance. I think Monty McNair has to assess that because, to your point, it's always backup centers to talk right now, just because we have seen a who's who of guys get 3, 4, 5 games, then disappear from the rotation. I mean, we saw Chimezie get early minutes, and then mid-December, it was like couldn't crack the floor. You see Rashawn Holmes get a shot the last several games. All of a sudden, last night, ain't going to crack the floor. And I'd imagine we're not going to see Rashawn crack the rotation for a while right now. So I think that's why that stands out. But kind of to your point is, does this team need another wing? Yes, I 100% agree. And if you're Monty McNair, you have to look at it from this standpoint. All right, I have an opportunity, and let's use this as a scenario. Right? I have an opportunity to address the wing or the big man situation. I think at that point, you have to roll a dice and say, okay, who's the best overall player I'm getting back? If it's a center, you go center. If it's a wing, you absolutely 100% go wing. Ideally, you'd like a wing that could play make, because I think that would really solve a lot of issues, especially when it comes to the backup center role. I think a big reason why Rashawn Holmes took such a dip, and we saw this starting last year, outside of personal matters and injuries, was once Tyrese Halliburton left the team, Tyrese made Rashawn so much better. So much better. And off that bench, there's just not really a playmaker that can get Rashawn involved quite like Tyrese did. Now, you're not going to find a Tyrese Halliburton to come off your bench, obviously. But if you can find a guy that can mesh with Holmes off the bench, get him some easy looks, that would solve the 5 issue right there. So I think that's kind of a best case scenario idea. But again, it's just going to really come to show what is available at the deadline.
Last question I have for you, Jay. We are very maybe optimistic, confident. It depends per person. This is the best chance. We can all agree this is the best chance that the Sacramento Kings have had of making the postseason in almost 2 decades. Like it's absolutely
not even arguable.
Yeah, right. So what are you most encouraged about considering the Kings' chances to make the playoffs? And what are you most concerned about with this team at this point in time?
So the biggest thing to me, what has me encouraged is we haven't seen that patent 7, 8, 9 game losing streak where it just seems like the sky is falling.
Yeah.
This team will lose a couple games and you'll have a night like last night where they bounce back. And that's, to me, what has been the most encouraging thing. And that's where it goes to kind of, like I said, maturity and having guys more in veteran roles now is they're not getting caught up in those huge lulls. And we've seen actually several veteran teams. Again, we mentioned the Clippers and Suns, both teams on 6-game losing streaks right now. The Kings haven't had that yet. So that's encouraging for me. The one thing that gives me pause, and we have seen this now for several years, is the home record. I think this team is a lot better than that home record indicates. And I think, what are they right now? 3 games above 500 at home? Yeah, they're 12-9 at home. You got to get to closer to 5, 6, 7 games above 500 at home if you truly want to be taken seriously as a playoff contender. Until that happens, yeah, I'm going to still have pause with this team.
Boy, you hit the nail on the head for me with that home record thing. That's definitely a concern, maybe the chief concern of mine as well, in addition to the obvious, which is the defense. But I think the two can be intertwined in a lot of ways. Jay MarZZ, I love you.
No kidding.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, my friend. I miss working with you, miss seeing you every single day, but you're doing a phenomenal job over there at Sactown Sports 1140 as usual. I mean, it's just another day for Jay MarZZ. I appreciate you. We'll have you back on again. We're making a pact right now, not if, but when the Sacramento Kings make the playoffs, we're doing some kind of playoff preview, or maybe not even better pact. After the trade deadline, we'll come back together and we'll assess what the Sacramento Kings did and how that shapes them up for a playoff run.
And don't you get the feeling after all this conversation today, we're going to do that and be like, I had not seen the Kings. I did not see that trade X coming. So no, it'll be fun. We'll do it again. Enjoy watching you on the TV, man. And yes, we'll make it happen very soon.
Big thank you to Jay for joining me here on the Locked On Kings podcast today. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. And again, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you would do at the trade deadline, how you think Monte McNair should approach it, and targets that you are interested in the Kings going out and getting. Also, who you would be comfortable with the Sacramento Kings trading away, which assets you would feel okay with the Kings giving up. At Matt George Sack on Twitter, email me mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, and get loose in the comment section down below. Appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me for the post-game episode of Kings and Rockets Part 1. Hopefully it's a similar result to the Kings and Magic the other night. And if you missed that post-game pod, go and check that out as well. I was courtside with Brendan Nunez of Kings Pulse. He decided to join me for the post-game episode of Locked On Kings. Had a lot of fun with him. So I hope you're enjoying the content, trying to get back on track. As you can see, video watchers behind me, the office is starting to come together again. The Lord of the Rings picture is right there on the ground. It will be hung up, and you will see the lights and everything very soon. I'm excited about that. I'm working hard on it. And we'll be back to normal very, very soon with that. Appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.